The theme of tonight's presentation is Microsoft Program Management for Dummies. And not that you're dummies, but I thought it was a catchy title. And this is an insider's guide to program management at Microsoft, and the insider, that's me, because I was there for 9 years until this July. And I have done a lot of things in my career. I was a technical director at PC Week Labs, and I was an IT manager in my past life. And as I said, I worked at Microsoft for a number of years in both product and program management roles. And I was a program manager in the Windows networking group. So we ran the network stack for the operating system. I was the program manager for the Windows Firewall, if anyone's familiar with that, with the Windows filtering platform, with IPv6, Teredo, which is a tunneling protocol for IPv6 that actually puts IPv6 over top of IPv4. I'm sure that makes sense to everybody. Virtual private networks and peer-to-peer networking technologies as well. In other words, I was responsible for a lot of things that nobody ever sees. It's all invisible. It's all under the covers. Although Mike might be familiar with many of these things being in security. So, although I love that. I've always felt it throughout my whole career, it's the stuff that's behind the closet that's really cool and really interesting. And when I was at PC Week, my lab actually focused on the enterprise products. So we were reviewing 8 processor servers in the late 90s. And I remember we had to have a forklift to move it around and stuff. And to me, that was so cool. This was the greatest stuff. It was interesting. At PC Week Labs, they renamed themselves to eWeek. The West Coast lab was the infrastructure group, and that was my organization. The East Coast did all of the consumer stuff. So they had all of the cool gadgets, software that people would run on there that you would buy in a store, and they would have the laptops and so on. So like we didn't even have, it was hard for us on the West Coast to get laptops and things. They always, my colleagues in the East Coast were always going around with the cool new laptops whenever we go to meetings. I literally was writing my stories on a 4-processor server that was sitting under my desk. That was what I was using as my PC sometimes. So this is kind of interesting. But I'll say that was I never had a job that was more fun in my life. Not that working at Microsoft wasn't bad, but that was really fun. And so I always have been pushing boundaries everywhere I go. Even at Microsoft, I did a lot of things there. I remember I started the recession study group in 2005, and I remember this was a club. It wasn't a formal Microsoft organization. And when I left in July, there was over 200 members, and we'd be having standing room only meetings for the last couple of years. And I'd organize speakers to come into campus and so on. And I remember, and I wrote a bunch of white papers about how I thought the economy would affect Microsoft and technology. And I remember one white paper that I wrote back in 2005. I just sent it around. This is all in my own time, right? This is no relation to my day job. And I remember Jim Alchin, who was one of the Microsoft corporate VPs at the time, he left. He became ill, and although he's better now, I hear. But he was still at Microsoft in 2005, and I remember I got an email from him saying, Michael, this is very interesting, and it's thought-provoking, but it's unlikely there'd ever be a significant recession, so we don't really have to think about this too much. I still have that email. And so I also, one winter break, so it was my winter vacation. I took 3 weeks off. And I spent the whole time conducting my own private research study into Linux users and why people like using Linux. And internally at the company, I know it was a really hot, this was 4 or 5 years ago, Microsoft was obsessed with understanding Linux and understanding why people were, how to compete against it. But all of the research I saw at the company seemed to focus around just how do we sell better? How do we position our products to better make them sound better against Linux? And I was thinking, well, I'd really like to understand what it is that people who use Linux really like. So I constructed a big survey of my own, an online survey, and then I spent my whole winter break emailing Linux user groups around the world, asking the presidents of them if they would mind if I sent my survey to their distribution list to all their members, asking about, and I was up front for Microsoft just trying to understand more about Linux. And so many of these people were receptive, and they would say, yes, please do. And then some of these presidents would send my request out with my URL as well. And so it was really going great. And then all of a sudden I noticed I was getting hundreds of requests of survey answers a minute on my survey. I ended up with 25,000 responses, and somebody had posted it to Slashdot, and then it got picked up in the news, and I was hearing a story on NPR about Microsoft doing research into Linux. And then I had PR people sending me emails and for Microsoft and leaving me voicemails. My VP of my division said, "What the heck's going on? What are you doing?" And it all turned out it was okay, and I explained there was no big problems. And then afterwards, when I went back to work and I put together the analysis, I spent weeks going on a roadshow through the company telling everybody the results of all my research. So that's the kind of stuff that I do, and I've always been very, of course, again, this has nothing to do with my day job, none of these things. And I'm always very passionate in trying to do the right thing for the customers. And so what is a PM at Microsoft? Well, the program management role is very amorphous. The job title describes a wide variety of things. So when somebody says they're a PM, to some extent, when they tell me that, I say, okay, but what do you do? Because it's hard for me to just tell when they use that job title. You can be a virtual development team leader, so actually leading an engineering team to build products. That's likely the thing that most people associate with a program manager. But you could be primarily focused around partnering activities. I know program managers at Microsoft who do nothing but coordinate and talk with third-party companies, making sure that they have no problems with the products that we're coming out with, they do have plans and project plans of how they're going to get these third parties and software developers to adopt things and so on, but that's what they spend their time doing, and that's a program manager. And there's also some program managers who spend all of their time doing project scheduling, just watching dates and milestones and making sure things come along. And some of those, they even at Microsoft will call them release managers, but it comes under the rubric of program management. So you'll often see program manager in the title. And there's even evangelism. So there's some program managers who spend most of their time doing evangelism, which can be a very fine line between partnering and evangelism, because a partner person is trying to encourage people to use the product. So you're doing a lot of selling. Now, I'll get into the classic PM definition. And the other thing that happens at Microsoft is that there's oscillations between generalists and specialists. And the group, over time, the way the organization's structured and how and the role they assign to PMs changes. I've seen it happen in my 9 years. So there's kind of cyclic things that occur in the waxing and waning of how PMs work, and it generally goes from being generalized to specialized and back. And so it depends on who the senior managers in your division are, what their philosophy of program management is. So that can happen as well. There's a question.
Yeah, before we go any further, can you be very clear about your definition of program and project?
So the question is, what's the difference between a project and a program? And at Microsoft, there is no job title called project manager. The program manager is the only position that they have which covers project management. Project management is a part of the program management function, but it is the program management title is more expansive, at least at Microsoft, to cover other things. And I should stress that I'm talking about program management